kingdom, it's because the love of Christ compels us. The commission of Christ propels us. Why do we minister the way that we minister? It's because the character of Christ impels us and keeps us moving towards Him. All kinds of ways to organize leadership, and our thoughts about it, just almost endless. But I've suggested to you that one helpful way might be to think about some key emphases in leadership. Character is foundational. On that we must build competency. If we are part of a team, and Jesus says that we are, there's a matter of cohesiveness as we navigate differing personalities. All ministry takes place in a context, and we talked about that last night. And then there's a matter of cohesiveness, where we try to, they say chemistry? Yeah, chemistry. Cohesiveness, where we try to pull it all together. With regard to context, I've suggested to you that a helpful way to think about it and to stay alert to it is simply to apply those standard questions that are eons old in summary. The why then followed by where am I? Who am I with? What are their needs? How in the power of Christ will I move to meet those needs? Will we move to meet those needs? And when? The application of the timing of the Holy Spirit, having an intentionality. All of those dimensions are affected by the matter of change, and we take that up this morning, navigating change personally and professionally. Let me preface my remarks by reminding you of a couple of statements from the Lord God. Malachi in chapter 3. I, the Lord, do not change. There is one being in the universe that is exempt from everything that we're going to talk about, because by nature, there is no room for improvement. When you are perfection, you don't need to move. You're there. You all get that. We could explore that passage in more depth. We can't take time this morning. I, the Lord, did not change. There's some good news attached to that to Israel. So you, O descendants of Jacob, were not destroyed. Woofda. So what God is really saying there is, you deserve that, he's implying. But because my integrity, my love, my compassion never wavers, you're not dead. That's good news for us too. There is an echo in the New Testament, of course, in various places, but in James, chapter 1 and verse 17, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change, like shifting shadows. So God does not change, and all that is directly attached to His being, I'm talking now about His Word, His plan, His sovereignty, all of His characteristics, those are locked. Those are immovable. Those are unchanging. Beyond that, everything else changes. And by His grace, the change that we contemplate as followers of Jesus Christ is movement toward Him. Again, there are all kinds of subsets to our thoughts with regard to that, but in church ministry, one of our great hopes, and in the face of a great many traditions within the kingdom, of which the Free Church is one, as we move towards Christ, we converge. Make sense? As all God's people move towards Jesus, we get closer together. It's been so encouraging to me to just be with you here at Camp Chaminade and to see the esprit de corps. You folk really seem to like each other. There might even be some love breaking out here. I'm teasing you, but that's a marvelous thing, and I hope that you don't take that for granted. There are fractured fellowships, not only individual churches, there are fractured traditions. You see that in your local areas, the pain of that, folk that are refugees from that. I've been stopped several times in the last 2-3 years in places like grocery stores, fleet stores, broken-hearted believers who knew that I was a clergy-type person. When you've been in a community quite a while, you know, they sort of recognize you. And they'd share their story. I'm by the freezer counter, the vegetable aisle, and they're talking about what's happening in their tradition. It's imploding. The Word of God is being abandoned. There are refugees, some coming to your church, some forming new traditions, new denominations, fleeing from the wreckage spiritually. So, wow, there's a lot happening, but never take for granted what you have here in your fellowship. I'm just honored to be a part of it. So let's, there's a few slides that are simply a review, and then I want to talk, hopefully challenge our thinking a little bit about change. Move pretty fast here. Start. The foundation for all we do is Jesus, and then those elements that I've suggested are one way, just one way to organize thinking about leadership. And the contrast, the analogy, metaphor from the garden. And so we talk about effectiveness in various elements. Reminded you in each of our sessions in a variety of ways, character is about heart competency, more about skill, chemistry about personality, cohesiveness about oversight, context about ministry, environment. All of the elements of leadership are affected by change. And if we're going to be effective as leaders, men and women of faith, in the 21st century, we need to be alert, we need to be cognizant of the impact of change, not only in our own lives, but in the lives of the people we serve. And there is a lot of change happening. Now, this is going to surprise you, maybe. I'll give you my personal background, just real cameo shot at it. I was the firstborn of 4 children. I'm rural, 5th-generation farmer, maybe more, but I don't really know about Germany. We found out recently it's the area that kept changing hands between Germany and Poland. It's quite convicting. When I was a kid, we had all kinds of Polak jokes. Sorry, that's your lineage. Because we were German, we could pick on them. And they were across the state picking on us, so it's just kind of a trade. 5th-generation farmer. I'm a Minnesotan, born and raised in the western part of the state, in Appleton. Our mail used to go to Wisconsin in the zip code days. I'm a boomer, right in the middle. I've been married 44 years. She's amazing. We're high school sweethearts. She still makes me weak in the knees, but that's enough about that. We have 4 children, 3 girls and a boy, 9 grandchildren, 2 step-grandchildren, a 10th grandchild by adoption on the way. We're an international family in some ways. I have Hispanic granddaughters. I have an Indian daughter-in-law. She's just lovely. Comes from a long line of believing Indian believers from the southeastern quadrant of that great nation. And I'm about to have an African-American grandchild. I don't know, do I look tan? No. We have fun with that, and our family picture, if we were to send that out to you, has this multinational flavor. So why do I start with stuff about me? I won't go on with grandchildren, you know, if you're a grandparent. Yeah. Because change is always personal. Change has an inescapable personal dimension. Can't get around it. Change is a very personal thing. Our identity influences how I perceive change, and how I evaluate change, and how I react to change, and that's true of you as well. Don't fight that. God knows. Each of us have a construct, each of us have a background, each of us have, if you will, a personal context that affects how we react to change. Also, change is about people. And all people, this is mostly review for you, but all people evaluate change subjectively. Now, we'd like to claim in leadership that we're somewhat objective, but wow, there's a lot of subjectivity that enters this field of change and reaction to it. Good change, typically, is change that lessens our dissatisfaction. Now that's a good change. We finally are moving our worship into the 21st century. God was there ahead of us, and we're moving in His direction. Now that's a wonderful change. We finally figured out what those hymnals are for, and we're in there worshiping as God intended. I mean, He wrote those things. And there we are. I'm toying with you. But you understand the subjective nature. And so in the church world, in which many of us live and move and have our being, one change can produce polar reactions. Same change. Yes, that's good. Oh, that's terrible. And we have to sort of husband that process. Bad change, change for the bad, is change that increases our dissatisfaction or decreases our satisfaction. And as I've noted, varied perceptions complicate the dynamics within an organization. Perceptions of the value change may vary widely. Doesn't even need to be said. What is good change to someone may be bad change to someone else, and this is happening all the time. It's a continuum. It's not this, oh wow, a couple times this last year something changed. It's all the time. Something is changing in every arena, either small or large. Again, even that designation is subjective. You are aware that change is stressful, but you may be less aware from day to day that all change is stressful. That is both good and bad change. So you can come, it's one of the phenomena in ministry leadership. For instance, if you've gone through a period of intensive change, maybe it's been a worship style, maybe it's been a governance change, maybe it's been a prolonged building program. At a district level, maybe it's been a major push, a major new initiative, reframing something. You will inevitably have, you'll fall off the mountain based on simply the stress reaction of change. Some of you have, many of you have gone through weddings. Some of you have paid for them, daughters, children. It's not at all unusual for many years in the pastorate as I counseled couples who were starry-eyed and just really looking forward to that great day. I would remind them gently, and they would ignore it until later, but I remind them that they would be exhausted at some point, probably on their honeymoon, and a bit of risk of disillusionment. They awaken now with a roommate who's not quite what they were hoping for 2 days earlier. And a great deal of that is, particularly that bride, had been pushing 16, 18, 20 hours a day for weeks. And now there's an implosion. And I would encourage them that will pass. And they'll discover that their new roommate is actually great. Almost as good as they'd hoped. You know? So, good change and bad change produce all kinds of change, produce stress. What's more, the stress of change is cumulative. It adds up. Help me out, I didn't put it in my notes. The stress scale, 100 down to 0. What's that one called? Does anyone know? Where the loss of a spouse is 100. It comes out of psychology. Anyway, you vaguely familiar with that, or perhaps you've worked with it. It was an attempt to quantify what kind of changes. And sometime in counseling you can use that instrument, and you know, people will come to you broken and they're all upside down and stuff, and if you just take the checklist, you know, some of those folk are 400 points into the stress zone. Just one thing after another, after another, after another. So it's cumulative. And, no surprise, there is a limit to how much stress we can accommodate in any one run or series of runs. That's just a human factor. We are fallen. We are broken. We are limited. God understands that. We sometimes forget that. And in American culture, in the West, actually, globally, in the West, there are a number of things that we can do that the rest of the world can't do to insulate ourselves from the inevitable. We can spend some money, we can run faster, we can distract ourselves, there's lots of things, but there is a confrontation that always comes, and there are limits, very, very tangible limits to how much change we can handle. Many of you are familiar with the work of Richard Foster. It's a little bit dated now, but it gets updated. Richard Foster was a general practitioner from Menominee, Wisconsin, who in his own trajectory as a professional encountered this whole stress thing. He wrote a book years ago now called Margin, and it's been updated. And he now divides his time. He's no longer in medical practice. He's a futurist. He travels the world and collects data and he's having a good time. He's a good resource. So margin, says Foster, is the difference between personal load and personal limit. Swenson, I'm sorry, what did I say? Foster, I was just diverting to the spiritual disciplines. Your prayer time, happy discipline. Thank you, Richard Swenson. So he talks about margin being the difference between load and limit. And we all have that. And he's, in the initial work, he had some really great illustrations about what happens to us as margin is erased. I think one of them was a Sunday school teacher who just adored preschoolers when there was margin. And then as the margin disappeared, she tolerated preschoolers. And then as she went into compression mode, she couldn't think of anything more annoying than a group of preschoolers. Now, what had changed? Well, it was her margin that had changed. The preschoolers were just doing what preschoolers often do. They're just being preschoolers, doing stuff, bouncing off the wall. When margin is exhausted, people will resist additional load, whether good or bad. They will say stop. And they will say it in your church. And it may or may not make sense. It may come from a trusted, godly mentor woman. It may come from one of your elders. And you introduce a good idea to a good elder, and they say emotively, stop, enough. I'm not so sure I even like you as our pastor, etc., etc. You go, what in the world is that about? Well, you've probably got a boy or a girl there who's all done for right now. The tank's on empty. And it might blindside you. It has happened to me in leadership. What in the world? This was just really one of the key components of the church, and now we're going weird. We're going sideways. Watch for the stress thing. The stress thing. Now, part of the challenge, and this will not surprise you, is that no generation in the history of the human race has faced the scope and pace of change being faced by this generation. There are individuals that doesn't apply to, and I'll get to those at the very end. But this is the most stressed out generation in human history, and likely to become more, not less, stressed in the future. A couple things. This is Swenson, not Foster. Swenson's information coming up here. It's a little dated, but still will be illustrative. 30,000 products in a fully stocked grocery store. If you've had an international student or an international guest from the second or third world come to visit you, and you take them even to the grocery in your small town, they will be stunned, in some cases beyond words. That, really? I've experienced trauma, and I'm a veteran. Marcia will occasionally ask me if I'm willing to pick up some groceries. Do we really need 65 different varieties of corn chips? Maybe we do. I don't know. Let's not vote on that. But I mean, it's just endless. Endless. And all of that makes choosing more difficult. Swenson says there's 55,000 configurations of coffee in Starbucks. If you do the math, and want to spend quite a bit of time at Starbucks. 48, the physician's desk reference was 300 pages, a big, fat, intimidating book. It was 3,300 by 2012. More video is uploaded. This is dated in 60 days on YouTube. This is much more compressed now than all 3 networks created in 60 years. There are 1 billion references on the WorldCat search engine, World Catalog. If you've done doctoral work, you understand. You only have to cover 100 million of them. No, just kidding. And there are now north of 1 trillion URL resources on the web. Now, that's very difficult to quantify, so Foster helped it. Swenson, Scandinavian, I should be able to stay with it. Swenson helped us, so I'll give you his trivia. Maybe you've heard this, you may not have. You can, if you're predisposed, count to 1 million in common cadence in about 12 days. Now, your coffee table house party trivia question for your guests is this. How long at the same cadence does it take to reach 1 trillion? You're going to sit around with your guests and count to 1 trillion. Be sure to brew extra coffee. 36,000 years. Now, I won't unpack the takeaways from that one, but when you hear trillions being discussed in various fields today, keep that in mind. 36,000 years. 1 trillion URL addresses. And information, and this, I apologize, I need to update this. We're well beyond 60% a year. I would guess that we're probably beyond doubling per year. And it will compress even more, which gives a little more objective framework to something I just sort of quipped in the first presentation. Remember I said all of us don't know way more than we know? When you think about the full field of human knowledge, the brightest among us, and I'm talking about the human race, tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the total. Which ought to, I think, in Christ give us an additional boost of our humility. Okay? There's also a tsunami of communication distractions. This also is a bit dated, but it makes the point. Cell phones, by over half of the world's population. My wife and I had the privilege of leading, along with a team, a conference for leaders in Uganda, southwestern Uganda. Uganda as a nation bypassed infrastructure and went straight to cell phones. So wherever you are in the Ugandan bush, it's likely that there will be someone near you, often in native dress, with a cell phone. And the towers are here and there on their ridges and hills and so on. It's very efficient, and they do quite well. There's side businesses. I smile. There are entrepreneurs, of course, throughout Uganda. And among those are guys with a battery that they've saved up for, a automobile battery. And then they put that in a hut, and that's a charging station for cell phones. And they charge some shillings for that. And so all kinds of things. But throughout the world, it's not at all unusual to be way, way, way back somewhere in the bush on one of the continents and to see someone flip out the cell phone, the flip phone usually, not too many smartphones there yet. But they're everywhere. And this is also a decline, and I'm not going to say advanced, but decline. We're well beyond 10 hours of media per day and 34 hours. Television is waning a little bit, but the screen time is increasing exponentially. So think screen. We're, including our youth, pretty much full-time on screens now, probably north of 40 hours a week on the screen. All of that generating pressure. All of it generating pressure. In addition, every generation in our culture grieves in some measure the loss of what is familiar. And we joke about it, but it's no fun to be incompetent. You know, and I'll be the first one to say I'm making progress in the tech world, but it's slow going. And there is a little bit of, it's a little intimidating when your 8-year-old grandson has to be your tutor in terms of how to run stuff, you know. It's also a little intimidating to have a sunset on your knowledge base. We had an elderly gentleman in our first church who was an expert at working with horses, draft horses. And as he finished his life, who cares? I mean, he was just phenomenal. And it was no regionally for his ability. And he was now living in a world that, who cares? So there's an obsolescence to that which has been part of her identity, and that's stressful. That hurts some. Now, as we move towards the concentric circles of ministry together, here's an insight that's helpful, I think. Under the stress of cumulative change, people will tend to guard and protect one or more arenas against change as a matter of psychological, sometimes physical survival. No surprise. For Christians, the area most protected against change will likely be their church or the ministry. The rationale is, here is the one place we can go in our stressed out lives where we don't have to face constant change. Here is the dimension of my life most closely linked to an unchanging God, who said, I do not change. I am the Lord. I do not change. I change not. Here's my place of sanctuary. Enter the Christian leader. All right then, let's get some changes made. This sanctuary. Let's get things moving. You know, let's shake it up a little bit. And we give pure support to that. So how are things changing? We don't say it quite that way. But what's happening? We mark our scorecards in Christian leadership on the basis of our ability to initiate successfully and carry out change. So sometimes we're not real popular in terms of our presence. Wish you'd just go away. Wish she would stop. Change is about motivation. Most important question concerning any change, here it is again, whether we advocate it, resist it, or whether we're the initiator or responder, is why. Why should we do this? And so it follows in leadership that answering that question is pretty foundational. Now, a little more background. So I'm going to go back and forth, application and then context here. Excuse me. Well, change is about culture. Bach and Hall say culture in its broad sense is what makes you a stranger when you're away from home. Myron Loss adds to that, most people are not even aware that culture exists in their environment. If they've been exposed to only one culture, they believe that the only way to do things is the way they've always done them. I was talking with some of you as leaders during yesterday's break times, and in one conversation we observed and acknowledged that all culture is invisible from the inside. All culture is invisible from the inside. So how is it that we can analyze our culture? Well, we have outside voices. Through media, we have people bumping into our space, letting us know that we have people making jokes about us. I say, oh, really? Is that the way we are? Pastor Reaver is sitting in the South over the winter, and those folk down there have an accent. Why, yes, they do. So do we. So we can do that a little bit, but it's really helpful in leadership to step outside and look back in. So if you have the opportunity to do that, there are various ways to do that. A missions trip will help you to do that. A certain amount of disciplined reading, interfacing with international leaders. But that will help you to understand your own culture and then to be able to navigate change with the understanding that the more countercultural change is perceived to be, the more difficult it is to accept. So sometimes you are introducing a redemptive change in your leadership, but there are elements of it that are countercultural. Let me give you an example. I suppose there's not a man or woman among us that would not like to see a true koinonia develop in our churches, in our small groups, really deep heart connection. In order for that to happen, and I alluded to it in the breakout session yesterday, in order for that to happen, there has to be an increase of verbal exchange, typically. We need to be more transparent and talk about it. So if that's the direction where you're leaning, if that's the push, you can expect pushback from Northern Europeans, from rural folk who already are shocked by the amount of transparency they're forced to endure. Not all of you were in that breakout session, but a real quick illustration. So in a more rural church setting, in a small town setting, in your congregation this coming Sunday will be the one town physician, or maybe one of two, and the person that they gave a complete physical to during the week. There'll be the school teacher and the student that got a failing grade, deserved a failing grade. There'll be potentially a banker or an ag lender, and the person whose loan is upside down, and there may need to be a foreclosure. And there'll be a pastor who says, we just need to be transparent. And the folk are reaching for hymnals to cover themselves as they feel naked. And now you're going to emphasize, let's get really transparent, let's get close in terms of how we share. And they're going to say, that doesn't feel right to me. And they won't say that, but they'll say, oh, it's that kind of reaction, that kind of thing. That might have been a cultural thing. Anyway, this is universally true. One quick anecdote also, just in terms of space. We learned that our guys opened up with a lot more space. We called it the man cave in Park Rapids, and it was huge. And we had some of our gals say, we need to divide that space into 6 spaces so you can actually get some intimacy. And that's just this big barn. The guys said, yeah, this is how we relax. That's about the right amount of space. Good. Don't crowd me. That sort of thing. In international business, they've studied this for years, and there was some humor in it. So in Latin America, I'm going to creep up on this slowly. In Latin America, there's appropriate social distance for business. I won't touch you. And even a little closer. In Northern Europe, there's appropriate distance for business. And what they had is international businessmen chasing each other around the office. Well, one person closed to do business, the other person opened to do business. It was just like this. And so they had to navigate that. In the church world, as you introduce change, you will get pushback as you move into areas that are biblical but countercultural. And it might help you, on a practical suggestion, just to talk about it. And I've done that with the guys in my churches through the years. I say, no, and girls, I did it very gently and respectfully. But I say, yeah, no, we're not girls, are we? No, we're not girls. And so when there's a men's retreat, and the wife asks, so who did you room with? Who did you have the bed? No, we don't have the bed together. There's a guy in the corner, and in that corner, one guy with his feet in the bathroom, and one guy drew the bed, and that's fine, but it's probably too soft for him, and he didn't sleep well. But we don't do the jammy thing. We just don't. We don't. So just having some fun with it. Having some fun with it. And girls, if you're not doing the jammy thing, forgive my stereotype there. I have daughters and a son, so I'm going by kind of that context. So it's helpful sometimes in our church leadership just to have fun with the nonsense. Just to toy a little bit with cultural contrasts, and it diffuses some of the tension and gets it out there. Does that make sense? It gets it out there where it can be recognized. That doesn't make it all go away, the trauma, but at least it quantifies it so people can begin to work with it a little bit more. Change, of course, is about the work of God in the lives of men. And so Christian leaders facilitate change and wrestle with change at the point of convergence. I call it a fault line, where the unchanging word collides with an ever-changing world.